This conference is not only talking about national security, but also about internal resilience. The Israel Police, under General Commissioner of the Israel Police, Commissioner Roni Alsheikh, has become a kind of deep strategic command that is responsible of our internal national resilience, which is no less important than our external, outside national security. It is a privilege for me to invite, and that he agreed to come and share with you the way he sees things in his special way, and share with us what he does, which is extraordinary. Commissioner Roni Alsheikh, the floor is yours. Good morning, and thank you for those words of opening. Thank you. And also for Professor Reichman's words yesterday. I didn't actually hear them, but I was told about them, and it truly, the way he stressed the importance of our work, and he did it from this platform, and I think it is of vital importance during this time to reinforce and strengthen that component of our national resilience. And therefore, despite everything that is happening, I felt that this justified the fact that I could come here. There's been a little more of a lull over the last hours, but I think it's very important that the police should convey and broadcast its sense of calm and lull. This morning, people asked me a question when they met me, apropos security issues. How could it be possible or feasible that police that burn the midnight oil, I mean, just so that you can understand, in the last weeks after the Nisan month events, and then all the way through to the day of the Holocaust remembrance and the day of memorial for the soldiers, and then the Miron mountain with the bonfire night and everything, and then Jerusalem Day. Just think about one after the other. And then the 70th celebration of Israel's independence, and now the opening of the various embassies in Jerusalem, the move. And so all these other security events in addition to that. So I don't think that any police have days, nights, holidays, and they're working really 24/7. So out of all of these, if you think about the 100 companies, let's say, that Israel's police has suddenly leaped from 77th position of the desirable companies to work in to 47th. How could that possibly happen the way they think? And we know that our Minister of Internal Affairs, of Homeland Security, is one of the greatest partners of all. And I think that the most significant issue in that is that Israelis are looking for some kind of meaning, and they do feel it. And that is why it has become such a desirable job now, because they really do see the meaning embedded in this work, and they feel that they have a tailwind there, there is backing there, that they have a place there, there is trust put in them. And if you think about all those decision makers there embedded. And for us, it wasn't surprising that more and more people do want to serve in the police. And we recruited over 4,500 police men and women after it was very difficult for many years to recruit them. So just think how difficult it is. You've got to adapt them to this role, and they've got to undergo tests for those, for example, who come as officers from the army. And how could it be possible? People come and complain that some of those officers are not accepted to the police. But we really do sort of shortlist them and test them and see their suitability. But I think from this podium, I would like to say, I would like to have stressed that. And I think in the past, I differentiated between two parts of policing. Perhaps this is somewhat artificial, the way I'm sort of splitting it up, of the classical one and the higher level of that kind of police, those that come from the various offenses and that come from the criminals, emanate from the criminals. They basically synchronize and harmonize together. So last year I spoke about our whole concept, how we differentiate between normative civilians and the actual criminals who commit the offenses. In other words, we are directed to results. In other words, lean management. We want to provide a value to our customer, to our client, and then we measure ourselves to see, did we manage to decrease the offenses towards the civilians and provide them with security, which is basically the essence of what we're doing. And this has paramount importance because this impacts the orientation of the specific policeman or woman. Now, if we're talking about the higher levels of policing, this is part of the reform that is going on, which is called intelligent sequencing and continuity. And I would like to make this more tangible in your eyes. And when we're talking about the directing ourselves to results and this war against crime, and the high kind of levels of policing. Not only do we want to decrease crime, but when we are actually fighting against the criminals and not only creating sort of a situation where we want to protect the actual civilians and prevent crime and protect them from crimes, but we're actually fighting against criminals, our index is always the one thing, and that is the index of reducing crime. Now think of all the gangs and the criminal organizations and the various indictments, and that's not what I'm actually really saying. What I'm trying to say that if we theoretically can reach all this outcome without reducing crime, it doesn't really suffice. What we want to do is when we're talking about battling it, then you have to think about the crimes and the criminals and the actual crime organizations. Then we're directly fighting against them. Even then, the orientation is basically at the end trying to decrease crime, because that is what the civilian wants. They want there to be less crime. So therefore, the value for our client is the top priority. So we want to really, we believe that we are measuring the effectivity of all this, and that is what we are doing. Now, what are our basic work assumptions? Some of them are perhaps self-evident. Now, one of them, we're talking about a networked world, and we know, of course, in the world of crime, there are Israelis who carry out crimes all over the world. In other words, inwardly and also outwardly, we're talking about them. There's still a lot of information that is accessible, and we can synchronize and synergize with the various sort of forces around the world. And this is, of course, the world of big data. So if we do jump into the deep side of the pool, then we can achieve things. But I think it's very significant that sometimes, even in the police, it's hard to really understand. And it took us time that we understood that this is a very strong Archimedes sort of point, that how we achieve this. Now, we are extremely documented, much more so than any other organization. All of our activities are specifically documented, pinpointed on the map and on the charts the whole time. So it's very difficult. You have to take the police activities, which is accumulating all the data, and fuse it with all this background of what the criminals are doing, and get first-class outcomes from the point of view of the effectivity of each of our actions. In other words, we're actually measuring this statistically, which I think from a statistic point of view, this is the kind of dependent variable that we're talking about. In other words, at any given time, we can actually assess our effectivity. It's very difficult to do it in any other organization, but because we're intensively documenting ourselves to such a degree, it really gives us our force and the way we implement it. And that gives us the capability to examine at apex timing what we're doing and maximize the outcome and the result as much as possible. Now, just a little bit about the backdrop, first of all. In order to be effective and streamline things, we have to systematically, in all our organization reforms that we actually underwent, is we have changed and reformed the way we act. So, for example, a policeman, when you're actually kind of working in a column, then you have to actually see where the weak link is, and after all, things are characterized by the weaker links, and we turn them into kind of network systems so that instead of working sort of in a column way, to create more and more synergy and grapple in a networked way. And the results are very swift. Now, for example, when we're talking about, as a case study, we took the property crime through this kind of thinking as the value for the client and decreasing crime, and see what the results are in that statistic assessment. And so we took that as a kind of case study, and from that we can actually sort of draw conclusions for other things that we do. So what we saw is that when we actually pool all the information that we've gathered, and all the data, some, by the way, were quite surprised by what we found, we suddenly saw that there could be some kind of alternative economics with a demand and supply. And then the proof, after all, is in the pudding. And we're talking about thousands of criminals through which the actual pipelines of enforcement of crime cannot actually reach and pinpoint and get to. So if we were measuring things cost effectively, we can suddenly see all sorts of partners in this, for example, property crime. Some of them, for example, their partners could be Palestinians in Judea and Samaria, some of them Israeli Arabs, some of them Jews. There's coexistence when it comes, amazing, remarkable coexistence and shared joint society when it comes to crime. So how does one deal with this when we understand that ultimately in these bottlenecks of enforcement that are complex, all we want to see is the outcome, a positive outcome. So we're talking not about gangs, and we're not talking about crime organizations, but rather a network where each one of them are individuals with individual conduct, and you've got the supply and the demand. And this is basically really a network. So ultimately, we need to identify and pinpoint, by analyzing this big data, who are those key criminals, key figures in this game. And statistically, we want to weaken the entire network. So with very few arrests, we can actually have a greater impact on the entire decrease of crime. So it's not only the gang carrying it out, but the others who are surrounding them, who are surreptitiously sort of hoarding all the actual things behind the scenes, not only the property, but their partners. And we can work on this for many years. So when you analyze it, and we're looking at only in statistical terms, you can actually see the little links between them, the communities, and you can actually do very simple analysis, sort of regionally and sort of inwardly in the various communities. There are regions and areas, if we do sort of cross sections of these things. And so with some crimes, you can go all the way to 100 kilometers, sort of a cross-cut section kind of thing. And it's all an issue of demand and supply. It's an alternative economy. And so we have to ask ourselves, how much do we need to spend, or how much do we need to do in order to really weaken that network? And then there's a decrease in crime. So just in order to illustrate it for you, there's no way that someone who steals a car is going to park it in its parking lot and then does some kind of tender. On the contrary, you've got to, when it's hot, you've got to catch the criminal and to see what he actually does with it. And things can change very significantly. And in a non-surprising way, we found that less than 20% of the quantity of criminals. The moment we remove them from the picture, wow, there is a weakening of this entire network. So we keep reassessing what we're doing and re-examining what we're doing, sort of, and compare. And then we can always accentuate the actual effectivity in our streamlining in such a way. And you can change things and sort of adapt them so that the fluctuations will change things and make us much more efficacious. So really, this will change the whole way we work in this high level of policing. So if we know how to actually identify the waterfalls of crime, of course, carrying out prevention of crime, ignoring who is actually carrying out, but preventing it in such a way, and create high policing that is directed to all the civilians and examining themselves the whole time. Of course, testing the whole time that proof in the pudding, and especially in this case of the property crime and other things. So suddenly the classical crime enforcement is actually carried out, and we examine ourselves in the specific stations, and that is sort of bottom up, and the high policing is basically from top to bottom, and we look upon the geographical side of it as well. I'd just like to give you an example of the decreasing of crime. You can see that between 2% and 4% decrease in the property crime, either because the organizations have been weakened, the crime organizations have been weakened, or perhaps because of our property is much more protective. It is less sort of as something that can be merchandised, that can be traded. And if we manage to actually in 1 year decrease 11%, then that gives us an index to our effectivity, and we will continue striving to look at 2017, 2018, then we can see that we're actually managing to do it even more. We're even enhancing the speed of our decrease in crime. And if you look at per 1,000 capita, then you can see the changes. And again, you can see it's now really increased in this just last 2 years. And when you're talking about the theft of cars, there are always gaps in the actual reportage of these crimes. So let's say we're talking about the thefts of cars in the criminology world. This is one of the parameters that can really predict the level of crime, because the moment it is stolen, you of course report to the police. And that's a parameter that you can rely on because it does represent the level of crime. So that's why I'm presenting it here. Of course, we've got additional parameters, and in surveys, we're talking about the exposure to it, the reportage of the various crimes, and of course, an increase in the reportage, which is very important. But the decrease does not actually, this decrease in crime does not represent a decrease in the reportage. On the contrary, an increased reportage, and which is not a surprise for us. We've seen this difference. So if we're talking about demand and supply vis-a-vis the theft of cars, we even developed it very swiftly, wherein it was obvious to us that when Israelis repair their cars in a Palestinian garage, then basically they're creating demand, because to get a 30% price for the repair than what you're actually going to pay in Tel Aviv, then you, of course, immediately you've sent out a wanted sign saying, listen, we need another car like that, exactly the same model, exactly the same thing, because you need the spare parts. Also, we're talking about slaughterhouses of cars in Judea and Samaria and other places. And I'm not only talking about those who open the axle and open the other parts, and those who are using infrastructure as well in order to actually steal codes, etc. as well. But we really have to try and work from maximal result. And if we look actually in the next 2 years and the last years that we've actually done, we've succeeded significantly in doing so. Let's hope that we'll do it now in the next coming year as well, because cars in Israel can become spare parts at actually apex speeds.
Here in Israel, it is less practical. So if we look once again at another example where we sort of go out of the of focus on the actual perpetrator, but rather look at the vectors that impact it, then here we have a huge rise in recent years. We're actually almost reaching our full potential. We can see the leap we had in 2017 and the leap we had in 2018. In just a single quarter, we are already reaching 1 billion shekels in repossession. And of course, with perpetrators, when you put your hand in their pocket, then that really helps to fight crime, not only by taking them out of the game, by putting them in prison, because if you're a senior perpetrator, then usually you continue working from prison as well. But we're actually creating a cycle that makes feasibility and desire to do crime go down. And the significance of everything I've said is really a view that is really oriented at the outcome. And sometimes it's a bit frustrating because you can take action that may seem meaningful and effective vis-a-vis an organization or a gang or a group, a crime organization. But if you didn't look at the full picture, perhaps you're not impacting the outcome. And that's why we're always looking at the outcome to see whether our actions are relevant. What also is interesting is also the connection between this alternative economy and the legitimate economy, because clearly the money at some point moves and shifts between these economies. And that is the point of corruption, of money laundering. And that is where we need to be, at this crossroads as well, and to analyze it. And there too, because we're talking about a lot of data, and certainly data that comes from other organizations, other law enforcement entities, because our world is highly digital, supervision over finance is much tighter. We are under international regulations, and we have a very good collaboration, very tight in collaboration. The FAA-ATF has carried out an audit of the Israel enforcement systems, and we have huge opportunities there through big data to really get to these crossroads, these connection points very quickly and very efficiently, and to develop law enforcement actions there that will help reduce corruption and money laundering. Of course, when it comes to that, you cannot look at it in any other way, through any other prism. And of course, we're helped by cyber and actual counter cyber crime. There are crimes that are done completely and utterly in cyber, and that's what we're interested in. And when it comes to public corruption, just so there's no doubt, if we create effective action with outcomes at the end of it of successful enforcement, but we don't reduce corruption, then we've done nothing. And therefore, our target at the end is always to reduce this phenomenon, no matter what kind of crime we're talking about, including public corruption. That is the prism through which we look at the entire thing, because otherwise we won't be able to say that we provide value to Israeli citizens that at the end of the day do not take part in this thought process, in this decision-making process, and they need to trust the Israel police force that it's doing the right thing. And so at the end of the day, it is a process that must be connected to classic policing through synchronizing processes between the high and classic policing, and to the side that avoids or prevents crime, no matter who does the crime, through police presence, through cameras and supervision, monitoring and surveillance, a lot of actions of situation prevention, also in terms of crime among regular citizens, but also vis-a-vis the high policing. So we're actually cooling geographic hot points or hot hubs, and also cooling the virtual online hot hubs, using this synchronization, which is really at work plan level. And we attempt to reach the best outcome possible for Israeli citizens. Thank you very much.